Bapak Ibu. Terima kasih atas kehadirannya pada hari ini untuk saya coba sharing mengenai ESG rating. Ini saya sudah coba untuk tampilkan layarnya atau tampilkan paparannya. Apakah sudah terlihat?
Sudah, Bu.
Ya, baik. Oke, terima kasih. Ini in English or in bahasa, Mbak Mali?
Maybe we can mix it, Miss Lu.
Oh, okay. So I'll try to explain in English first, Bapak Ibu, and then if you have any questions, I can reconfirm in bahasa, or if you need me to explain in bahasa, please do interrupt as well. So today is basically just an introductions of ESG ratings. So before we move forward toward ESG rating, so I would like to introduce on sustainable finance first, because obviously ESG rating is closely related to the sustainable finance, because ESG rating is obviously one of the information that is used for the implementations of sustainable finance. So here I'm taking the definitions of sustainable finance based on the EU, which basically talking about sustainable finance as the introductions or the integrations of environmental, social, and governance considerations into the investment decisions making, basically. And this is why the metrics that we will discuss today is called ESG metrics. Because obviously, if it's not ESG, then it might be just ES or other type of terminology. But because it is closely related to sustainable finance, and sustainable finance definition itself clarify that it takes environmental, social, and governance, and this is where ESG, in a way, as a terminology, might be slightly different with, for example, CSR, corporate social responsibility, because in corporate social responsibility, it might not include governance within its scope of definitions, while when we're talking about sustainable finance and ESG, it includes governance. Why? Mostly because it relates obviously to investors, right? And for investors, governance is one of the very critical aspect that needs to be considered. So this is, I would like to introduce the terminology that we use today. And obviously within the sustainable finance movement, if we look at how we define the scope of sustainable finance, here I'm looking at how the UN Environmental Program Finance, UNEP-FI, define it as three big parts, which are the sustainable banking, which has the principles for responsible banking, sustainable investment, which has the principle for responsible finance, or PRI, for some of you that are more familiar with PRI, and also sustainable insurance, which has the principles for sustainable insurance. So sustainable finance is not only about investment, but it's also consider banking and insurance as well, if we look up at the UNFI. Obviously, the main focus for many, including the main focus for our discussion today, considering the use of ESG informations, including ESG metrics or ESG ratings, would probably mainly on sustainable investments, which is basically on how ESG is used for decision making in regard to the market, to the financial market, to the investment in related to financial market, whether it is share market or bond market, right? And the other sustainable banking, some of them also use ESG metrics, but because it's much more sort of streamlined in terms of the product and services that's available for sustainable banking. So the use is also much more sort of focused on certain things. For example, the use of ESG metrics as part of performance measurement systems for the sustainability related link loan, for example. So that's basically how we use it. So this is the overview of sustainable finance itself. And again, for all of you, if you have any questions, please feel free to interrupt me. Obviously, if we still have time at the end, we'll also have time for question and answer. But if you have any questions while I'm presenting the slides, then please feel free to interrupt the presentations. Okay, so here again, just an introductions of some of the instruments that are generally used if we're talking about sustainable finance. Obviously, here are more on debt, for example. So you have the green bonds, which obviously can be traded in the bond market or other type of market. And then you have also the loans that's generally related to sustainable banking. So this is just an introduction of what are the contexts in which these ESG metrics or ESG rating are going to be used. In terms of investment specifically, right? So I mentioned before that one big part of sustainable finance is sustainable investment, in which, again, ESG considerations is being included within investment decision making. There are some mechanisms involved, so it can be in the form of integrations. So ESG factors are integrated into the models for investment analysis, for example, by investment managers or by some venture capitals, for example. That's can be called as ESG integrations. Some other mechanisms include more active involvement in the form of corporate engagement and shareholders' actions, where the investors not only decided to invest, but also subsequently engage in how the company decide on policies or implement sustainability, environment, and social aspect within their business operation. This might include proxy votings within the annual general meetings, for example. That's usually called corporate engagement and shareholders actions. Some other terminology for it is shareholders activism. Some of you might have heard of it. Another type of mechanism that's generally used for the purpose of mutual funds creations or mutual funds management or funds management per se, or portfolio management per se, are the norm-based screening or negative screening or best-in-class screening. So in general, it's a screening mechanisms. It's just a different sort of criteria. For example, if we use a norm-based screening, then we use certain norms. For example, norms provided by the UN, by the ILO. For example, if we want to create a portfolio based on Global Compact, for example, portfolio based on Transparency International sort of criteria or norms. So that's usually called norm-based screening. Other type of screening can include the exclusionary screenings, where in the process of creating the portfolio, the investment managers or the analysts will exclude certain companies based on their ESG factors that might include also ESG ratings as well. Most of the time though, ESG metrics or ESG informations are used for positive screenings, which means that the company or the investors create a portfolio for the companies that are best performers in terms of their ESG performance. And obviously, when we talk about best performance, then the analyst will need informations that's really sort of easy to use in terms of ESG performance of the companies. And this is where ESG metrics such as ESG ratings are generally used, even though ESG ratings can also be used for other type of mechanisms as well. So another mechanisms that is for investing are the thematic investings or impact investing. So for thematic investing or impact investings, it's much more sort of there are philanthropic sort of sense of it, where there are needs for obviously financial returns, but there is a missions for it, right? There are certain missions, certain impact, certain theme that want to be achieved. For example, poverty reductions investments, or sustainable agriculture investment. So there's a very specific sort of theme where in many cases the balance between financial return and the impact sort of skewed toward the impact, but yes, there are expected financial returns. So these are some sort of mechanisms where the ESG ratings that we will be looking at today are used mainly for. So how do we know that ESG ratings are actually used? So we have these reports, and this is the source of information that I will use quite a lot within these presentations, which is Rate the Raters report by one of the divisions in ERM, which is a big consulting firm within the sustainability area, which is called Sustainability. So by having this survey to the investors and to the users of ratings, they are looking at, especially for investors in a way of sustainable investors, those who are implementing sustainable investment. They're looking at how or what type of data, as I mentioned before, that sustainable investment needs data on ESG that they will integrate into their decision making for investment analysis for so. So based on this survey, we see that there's still quite a lot of dependencies, or there's quite a lot of use of ESG ratings. Obviously, we see here as well that due to some concern that I will also explain later, there are some increased trend of in-house research where they on the other hand, we see decreasing percentage of use of corporate ESG ratings. But mainly, if you're looking at the in-house research itself, the data used by the in-house research within this investment entities are also using ESG ratings as well as one of their source of data. Even though we still see a big part of investors also have direct engagement with companies and also still rely on sustainability reports. And interestingly, we also see that rankings also become one of the main source of data. So if we look at the metrics per se, we see here ratings, which is 53%, and also ranking, which is 16%. So it's still quite a lot of significant numbers. So again, what are the cycles of this ESG data or ESG metrics? So I'm using the terminology of ESG metrics to represent ESG ratings and ESG rankings. Again, even though the examples or the title of the presentations today, ESG rating, is just because of the terminology that most people are familiar with are ESG ratings, even though in actuality, the terminology that especially in an academics field, the terminology for ESG data that represents this sort of numerical representations of ESG performance are generally called ESG metrics. It can be in a form of ratings, it can be in a form of ranking, which I will explain later. But how does this cycle of informations move on within the ESG rating, or what is the relationship between this ESG rating, investors, and also the corporate sectors? So obviously here, we see that obviously there will be some sort of relationship between three parties. So you have users of ESG informations or investors here, many of them. And then you also have corporations, and we also have these ESG firms. So basically there are some sort of relationship between them, between the investors and the ESG ratings. We have this service provider. So basically the ESG ratings will provide, ESG rating firms will provide data, information, score, rankings, P comparison, controversies data, and so on toward the users, which are mainly, if we're looking at the trend currently, are institutional investors. And some of them are also supply chain partners. So obviously there is some sort of a client customers relationship here between the investors and also the ESG rating firms. But also, obviously, there is a relationship between investors and corporations as well. This is where we see that investors might also, if they have certain need for additional data in addition to ESG ratings, they will require more information to the corporations, for example, or corporations can also proactively provide disclosures, certain data to their investors, especially if they have institutional investors as their shareholders, as a part of a form of transparency. But between the rating firms and corporation itself, there is also a relationship. This relationship can be in a form of a passive, which I will show later. There are some rating firms that have this passive sort of strategy where basically firms do not actively, or corporation do not also actively contact or have relationship with the ESG rating firms, where ESG rating firms, it passively just receive information from the corporations in a form of publicly available information. It can also in a form of NGO report, journalism report, press releases on controversies, or even mass media or even social media news about controversies or other ESG source of information. But other type of involvement can be more in an active form, where ESG rating firms and corporations can have an active sort of communications in a form of survey, for example. So some ESG rating firms are also sending out surveys or questionnaires to the corporations to sort of get a clarifications, confirmations, or even corrections that needed for them to accurately or to increase quality or reliability of their scoring mechanism or scoring data. So this is the form of relationships. So in this, what type of ESG information is actually available out there? So if we're looking at the report by the IOSCO, there are quite a lot of type of products. So here I'm looking at products including raw data. So raw data in a form of scores, and the scores can also in a form of scores of ESG aggregates, or score in a form of each indicator. So you have score for, let's say, emissions, score for water, score for biodiversity, score for human rights, score for occupational health and safety. So that's called indicator score, or it can be ESG rating or ESG score. There's quite a lot of terminologies being used by the providers. Providers can also provide screening tools some companies or some investors might not have, again, in-house research, for example, so they also require some additional assistance by these ESG rating agency in a form of a tool to screen. So the clients, the investors, just provide criteria to the ESG rating agencies to screen companies based on the criteria that's provided. Some ESG rating agencies also provide controversies alerts. So if there are controversies regarding some companies in the investors' portfolio, then these ESG firms can provide some sort of a alert so that they can make decision based on the most recent controversies. But then they also provide quite a lot of product and services, including services to create indices. For example, in Indonesia, we have these indices based on Sustainalytics, for example. We also have consulting services provided by the ESG rating agencies of portfolio analysis. There are also certifications, even some compliance assistance, or even advisory services. So there's quite a lot of quite a wide breadth of services provided by this rating firm agency, or there's quite a lot of breadth of products related to these ESG informations. So if we look at the terminology, again, this is so that we understand the terminology surrounding this ESG information that's out there. So the first terminology, the considered very broad terminology, is metrics. It's basically the aggregates raw data within ESG data sets. So there is a measurement. So metrics mean numerical measurements for ESG data that usually is an aggregations of data from the indicators level per se. And then another terminology of very specific form of the metric is ESG ratings. So ESG ratings is basically, again, sustainability performance derived by analyzing ESG data. It can be in a numerical score, so like 90, 70, and sort of, some majority of the ESG rating agency provides scores in the range of 0 to 100, for example, or letter grades. Letter grades is similar, like if you have credit rating agencies providing credit ratings, for example, so they have letter grades itself. So it can be like AAA, BBB, AA, for example. So that's a rating. It can be scores, it can be letter. Another form of metric is ranking. The difference between rating and ranking is that when we talk about ranking, obviously it's a relative performance. So it's not an absolute performance. For example, it's not like 90 or 100, but how does it relate or relatively to the other companies or to the industry? So this form of information is also provided by some of the rating agencies. And the other important part here is we need to know the real the definitions of ESG rating firm. So any provider that actually provide this type of ESG rating is generally called ESG rating firm. And we also will see later on who are the major players. So who are the major ESG rating firms that's globally nowadays. So in terms of flow of informations, here I would like to provide some sort of clarifications or a flow in terms of how does the ESG information is currently flowing. So obviously we have company or corporations who actually report their sustainability or their ESG performance using some frameworks or standards. And there will also be auditors and obviously also software providers. So when the information is being produced, there are quite a bit of parties involved here. Obviously, in order to provide a disclosure, there might be some needs for some software. For example, Oracle and SAP, they provide certain modules within their products to help companies to provide disclosure or to publish disclosure in regard to their environment, especially with the auditors. We have some firms that provide assurance service for sustainability reportings. Obviously, we also have the frameworks and standards. Some of you might know about IFRS, GRI, and so on. So that's the framework and standards. And this is where the rating agencies or rating firms actually play. So they are the one who actually will be the first, let's say, sort of users of these informations, because in majority of the cases, it's quite rare for end users or investors to immediately look up at the sustainability report. For example, many generally start with the data that's provided by ESG rating agencies, for example, with the scores and with the ranking, with the ratings. So there are data providers and analytic platforms. Generally, they are within the same firms. Okay, and then obviously then you have the end users, which are investors or maybe other stakeholders if we are talking about multi-stakeholders reports such as GRI. And this is one of the examples, some of the examples, even though again, bear in mind that this is on 2020. So for most recent methodology, please look up at each of the ratings. So here I put 3 different examples on how ESG score here can be provided by the ESG rating firms. For MSCI, one of the earliest data, which is KLD data, Kinder, Line, and Dominic, it started in 1997, if I'm not mistaken. So probably the oldest type of sustainability sort of scoring data, which is KLD. It consists of only indicators. So they only have environmental strength. So they divide it into strengths and concerns. So they have environmental strengths, environmental concern, community strengths, community concerns, human rights strengths, human rights concerns. So the data providers are only within sub-dimensions. So it's not being aggregated into a score. But again, MSCI also have a score, right? So they ask different products. So this is just one very specific product, which is MSCI KLD. MSCI ESG score is in a form of a score, as what Refinitiv and Bloomberg also provide, right? And we talk about score, usually it's talking about the aggregate score. But this is, I just wanted to show you an example of KLD because again, this is one of the earliest data and they are unique in a way that it is provided only within the indicator or subdimensions level. There is no aggregations for this data. But again, MSCI do provide aggregated score, but not based on this KLD data, but using a different methodology. But they might use the same indicators, but sort of different, slightly different methodology. Another type is which is the ESG score. This is one of the example by Refinitiv. So Refinitiv have sort of like 4 layers of data. So they have layers of aggregated ESG score. Then they have layers where they have score for environment, social, and governance, but they also have score for sub-dimensions. So for environment, for example, it is divided into 3 dimensions. So they have score for resource use, score for emissions, score for environmental innovations. For social, they have score for workforce, human rights, community, and so on. But each of these score is derived based on more than 300 data points. So 300 indicators contribute to the aggregations of resource use, for example, and then it further being aggregated into environmental score and then aggregated into ESG score. So they has 4 levels of aggregations, right? Another, which is sort of more common, is ESG score, which only consists of 3 layers. So only on indicators level, And then from indicators, it's aggregated into environment, social, and governance. Obviously, environment score here is based on environmental indicators, social is based on social indicators, and governance based on governance indicators. But in terms of score provided, they only have data at the indicator level and score for environment, social, and governance, and aggregated score for ESG. So this is sort of different examples on how ESG score provided by different type of ESG rating firms. So again, it depends on what is the need of each investors or even users. I know some of the participants here are from academics. Depends on whether you need the data at the aggregate level, at the ESG level, or at the dimension level, or even sub-dimension level. It will decide, for example, which score that might be more useful for you. So in terms of who actually provide this data, here I'm again from the raters, we have the main players. So the major providers, here we have some of the big familiar names. So we have Bloomberg's. With Bloomberg, they have Bloomberg ESG disclosure score that I said before. We have Sustainalytics. Sustainalytics is currently actually under Morningstar. Maybe some of you are more familiar with Morningstar. Morningstar is again a big mainstream information provider within the financial field. And we also have MSCI. Again, MSCI also big financial data firms. And also, again, each of these providers might have more than just one product. So they have multiple sort of combinations of products. And then you have more independent, so it's not owned by big companies such as Ecofadis, Repris, Just Capital, and the more familiar might be is the CDP because it's an independent institutions. But generally, the independent institutions are more focused on certain topics, more specific on certain area of ESG. For example, with the CDP, it is more specific on climate, water, forest, and the newest amount is human rights, while Repris is more on risk, right? How do you see sustainability as risk? When another type of providers are the actually providers owned by stock market. So usually the information is provided in a form of indexes such as the FTSE4Good, which has the FTSE4Good index in London Stock Exchange and Malaysia Stock Exchange, if I'm not mistaken. And also there's ISS and Refinitiv as well. But there are some new form, which is rating agencies actually owned by provided by credit raters. So S&P actually, if you remember Robeco SAM, it's actually now under S&P Global. So it was Robeco SAM. Robeco SAM is the source of data used to create Dow Jones Sustainability Index in the US. So that's probably one of the biggest and most well-known, as well as the earliest sort of ESG or sustainability index that we have. And it was created based on data provided by SAM or Robeco SAM, but then SAM is acquired by S&P. So now it's under S&P Global. We also have Fitch and Moody's as well also have the ESG ratings. Sorry, in terms of coverage, so this is just data based on, again, 2020. So again, maybe, based on the newest, you will be able to check it within the website. Some of the key products and coverage, if you see here, for example, the key product representative is the scores, and then the MSCI is ESG ratings and the KLD. Bloomberg's have two, which is metrics and disclosure score, and then the other provider as well. One thing that is that I would like to highlight here is probably the Sustainalytics, which presents some sort of a unique and probably different approach compared to other providers since 2019, because before 2019, the Sustainalytics provide ESG score. So score in a form of 0 to 100, where the highest score that you get showing the better ESG performance, right? That's the approach that most ESG rating provider implement. So it's a scoring where the highest score that you got, or the highest score that a company got, the better ESG performance that they have. But then since 2019, Sustainalytics changed their main offerings. So they start to use the risk approach in their product offering. So they, starting from 2019, start to offer ESG risk rating, where the lower score that you have, the better risk, the lower risk that you actually face in terms of ESG. So in a way, lower score is better. So that's ESG risk rating. So it's a different sort of approach. In a way, scores for ESG are provided by the firms. And as I mentioned before, each firm also have different sort of approach in terms of sourcing the information that they use. So they have for example, here we can see that most are using passive. Passive, again, meaning that the rating does not actively communicate with the corporation in a form of survey or confirmations per se. So there is no confirmations or survey issued by the rating agencies to the corporation, and then they have to fill it, right? On the other hand, we have CDP. Some of you might know CDP actively communicate with the company, and the company will be required, or CDP will provide certain questionnaires that the company have to fill in order to be the main source of data for their scoring. So here we have some of the rating agencies that have more passive and some that have more sort of active approach. And some are more generalized. And as you can see here, generalized, it means that it's ESG overall, everything. Some are more specialized, as I mentioned before, more on climate issue, more on risk issue, or more on environmental issue per se. So that is sort of an overview of some of the major players within the ESG information market. Okay, here we have questions from Ibu Santi here. Are there any Indonesia companies covered by these ESG providers? Yes, there are. Companies in Southeast Asia, Singapore, Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, Philippines. Some of the companies are covered by majority of the providers here. So if you look up at the majority of providers here, especially with the big provider such as MSCI, Refinitiv, Bloomberg, and Sustainalytics, as well as S&P, most of them will have data on some companies, but not a lot. If I'm not mistaken, for Indonesia, at Indonesian company at Refinitiv, at least or around just like 30 to 40 companies, and they only started rating them in 2019 or 2018, if I'm not mistaken. So it's very limited at this point. Other companies in Singapore, and Malaysia are much more covered. So there are a lot of more coverage for companies in Singapore and Malaysia from the information that I have. So quite a lot more compared to Indonesia. And that's mainly one thing as well, maybe for that questions, Bu Santi, and for everyone participants here. If a company is not rated, so we cannot find the rating of this company, for example, company XYZ in Indonesia, this company is not rated. So we cannot find the rating or the score of this company in all of the provider. it does not mean that this company XYZ have a bad ESG performance. Why? Because one of the main factor in which this rating agency decide on which companies that they will assess is the demand from their clients, demand from the investors they serve, demand from the customers. So if there is no demand from their customers to actually assess company XYZ, then maybe this company or this rating agency will not assess them. But it doesn't necessarily mean that this the ESG performance of company XYZ are bad, right? It's just mean that they are not being rated, right? It can be, again, there are no demand for ESG rating for that company, or maybe, yeah, maybe the ESG performance is bad. But another way is, another reason can be there's no demand for that specific company to rate it. So that's one thing that you know have to be considered when we are looking at whether certain companies have been rated by rating agencies or not. Yeah. Okay. Follow-up questions by Bu Santi. Some of these companies, obviously, the big banks, right? The big state-owned banks, BRI, BNI, Mandiri, CIMB Niaga, and some BCA. Majority, if I'm not mistaken, majority of the big publicly listed which are very high market capitalizations are covered, such as, again, Pertamina and some of the big companies like mining. Most of the mining companies are again covered as well. Some of the agricultural companies, palm oil companies are rated. I kind of forgot some of the manufacturers as well. So if you would like to see, some of them actually are available if you would like to see the overview. So for example, for Sustainalytics, they have overview for certain companies in a way that they will provide you with the score, but they will not provide you with the detailed data. So for example, for Sustainalytics, they have Sustainalytics ESG risk score for Bank Mandiri, for example. But then they will only provide you in their website the final score, final aggregated score. For example, how much? Maybe 20 or 15, I'm not mistaken. You can check it in the website, but they will not provide the details, right? Okay, how do we get to this 15 score? What are the criteria? What are the indicators? It's not provided publicly. So you have to, the user have to buy it, right? But you can check the aggregated score in the website of Sustainalytics. So that's probably some of them, just some of the companies that I can name so far. Hopefully that helps, Bu Santi. So in terms of, okay, out of these big companies, which one that sort of have, being preferred by the investors and by the corporate? Obviously, as we know, there are three-way interaction there. There are three-party relationship. So obviously, investors and corporations might have their preferences in terms of assessing the quality or usefulness of their products. So we see, again, the raters have done this survey, and they see that based on the investors, here we see the quality and usefulness. So we see that ISS, CDP, and Sustainalytics are between the among the three major provider that is considered as having the best quality. While for usefulness, we have the CDP, ISS, and Sustainalytics again, but it's just a sort of a different ranking. So we can see here sort of different preferences, but obviously, if you look at the raters report, it is based on survey to the investors and corporations globally. Again, most of the respondents coming from Europe, or US, Canada, most of the developed countries. So again, there might be sort of a different preferences or different type of result for, again, investors that actually invest in developing countries such as Southeast Asia. This is the one provided by the corporations. So by corporate responders, they say that the CDP, again, S&P and Sustainalytics are the one that they think are better in terms of quality. And for usefulness, they still, again, rank CDP. Maybe, again, this is also related to the active communication that the CDP also have with the corporations as well. Right, there are quite a few questions here. Again, Pak Akmal Budiman, do you think in the future corporations will be required to have an ESG ratings? I'm not sure. Can't really answer on it because obviously it takes quite a while. It takes quite a lot of costs to be rated because again you have to create a disclosure that the company this rating agency need. There's quite a lot of a cost and benefit analysis that the regulators need to be doing when they decided on whether rating will be compulsory, because obviously nowadays with rating there's quite a lot of concerns still. I will mention some of the concerns at the quite a bit of a later at these presentations, but there are concerns with the ratings. So I think based on the current trend, the regulators mainly trying to sort of sort out the players first, making sure that it's a regulations for the ESG information market, I think. And maybe after the market is being settled, market is regulated, the quality of ESG rating can be improved, transparency is improved, there is no conflict of interest and so on. Maybe after all of these things being done, then there can be a requirement to have an ESG ratings, for example. We sort of, so if you look up or the analogy of the credit rating market, for example, it's pretty sort of mature, right? You only have 3 credit ratings and so on. The ratings are generally sort of similar in terms of result, but with the rating agencies, there's quite a lot of concerns involved still within the information market itself, like who can provide it, what would be the standard methodology, what would be the standard criteria, how do we ensure the quality, how would you ensure the transparency, what if there is any difference, what if there is any conflict of interest, and so on. So I think based on the current movement by the EU, the regulators from the European Union, they are still focusing on make sure that the market is being regulated first. And then maybe afterward, they can start thinking about making it required. I think that's my opinion so far, Pak Akmal. Okay, and then we have Nur Hazima Mohammed. Okay, so thank you for the informations. Obviously, I'm not quite familiar with Malaysian Stock Exchange, but I think listed companies and encouraged to be constituents of FTSE4Good. Obviously, with the FTSE4Good index, the one that I know, it has sort of a limited number of constituents within the FTSE4Good index, right? Because I think maximum is sort of like 30 or 40. So certain index might have more, but some index only have like 30 companies or 25 companies within the index. So obviously to be included within that index will be reputationally obviously beneficial for the companies to be included within this index, including maybe the FTSE4Good itself. But in terms of whether there is any sort of regulation that encourage them, I think it's good if there is any, and if Malaysia is promoting the companies to be able to be included within this FTSE4Good index, and I think that is a great move as well. Okay. Thank you. Nur Hazima. And then Pak Wiki, is the corporate health rating by Perfindo can be considered ESG ratings? I am not familiar, Pak Wiki, with the corporate health ratings by Perfindo, but again, we need to check on the methodology. We need to check on whether they are actually using ESG criteria or indicators within their rating methodology, and if their indicators used within their rating methodology are mainly ESG, then maybe it can be included as ESG ratings. But in most of the cases, ESG ratings are mainly on environmental, social, and governance. So just focus on the certain things, these three things. So for example, maybe they have criteria on the economics such as profit and return or leverage and so on. It is not included within this ESG. So hopefully that answered the questions. And we have here Ibu, I assume, Darsini. Which of these rating need for company to choose to participate in instead of agency capturing data from publicly available data? Again, in terms of which company to be participate in, I will be able to discuss that within the later part of this presentation, Bu Darsini. So maybe this question is pending and I will try to answer it later within the slides. Okay, Ibu Nabila, okay, with the proper, because it's focused only on environmental and social, generally it is not included within the sort of ESG, because with the ESG, you need the E, S, and G. At least that's the definition that's provided by the, again, European Union regulators. So for them, ESG rating are the rating that cover all the three dimensions. So E dimension, S dimension, and G dimensions. If it's only E and S, so it's generally not considered as ESG. So there might be a sort of environmental score and so on, but maybe in terms of scope, it's also different. From my understanding, proper is evaluated for each site. So if, for example, if you have one company that has two, or one mining company that has two sites, a site A and site B, site A in Sumatra, for example, site B in Kalimantan, proper is being evaluated for each site, not for company overall, but with the ESG rating, we are talking about company overall. Hope that helped, Nabila. Okay, so Pak Asmar from Malaysia. Okay, so any thoughts or comments on the company, on the IFRS S1 and S2, since some companies, especially in the EU and Singapore, will start disclosing it in the sustainability statement next year. Looking at the perspective of the rating agencies, some rating agencies so far, the one that I know is CDP, that already tried to include the indicator within S2, especially S2, because CDP is focusing on climate, and between S1 and S2, the one that related to climate is S2. So they are already trying to integrate the sales requirement within S2 within their questionnaires. So at least the rating agency started to move toward there. I'm not sure about other rating agency, but the one that I know is CDP is already considered that. So I assume that because some regulator, some jurisdictions are already moving toward mandating the requirement for the countries. So far that I know, some Australia has published exposure draft to implement IFRS S1 and S2 in Australia, Korea, I should say Singapore. With the EU, it's actually not IFRS S2 and S2 specifically, but they are creating their own sustainability standards. So European Union's European Sustainability Reporting Standards, which are using both IFRS and GRI perspective, so that they're trying to combine these two and creating a different standards. And it will be required, I think, starting from next year for this period, 2024 period. Obviously, the first report will be published in 2025. So I think since we see this type of movement, so I assume that this rating agency will also start to consider the applications of this FRSS and S1 and S2 within and scoring methodology. So I hope that answer or that can be a part of a good discussion point there, Pak Asmar. And then Bu Musfianti, okay. In Bahasa, rating, is there a cut-off? Because there is a different date in terms of the date for score. So yes. So for the scoring, for score published by this almost all of this provider, they will have updates for their score regularly, right? Some in majority of them, they will update them based on the most recent data that they have from the companies. So for example, if the company published sustainability report in 31st of March, then the rating agency will update their rate or their score based on this data, and they will create the score for that year, for example. But there are no certain cutoff, but they will update the data regularly. At least the one that I know from Bloomberg, Refinitiv, Sustainalytics, and which one that I know? Yeah, but that at least for those three, they update the data regularly. So some of them might be no update for the whole year. So maybe the only update is the one that after sustainability being published. Maybe other company, because there are certain controversies or certain significant update for their ESG in the middle of the year or near to the end of the year, they will update it in the data. But usually, at least if we download the data at a certain type, then that will be the most recent data, the most recent update that they have. Obviously, if we want to look at the historical data, for most of the company, we have to pay here. Okay, and then if the rating provided by Refinitiv have the same meaning as rating provided by Pefindo, again, I'm not familiar with the Pefindo rating, so we have to compare the methodology. So one thing that I would like to emphasize is that when we use the rating from either one of these providers, we have to really understand the methodology that they use. So before we download the rating, before we look up at the rating, make sure we download the methodology document that they provide. We show on, again, how they create their rating, whether they have 4-layer, 3-layer, what type of indicator, whether the indicator used to assess is different per industry, because again, some rating agencies have different set of indicators for different industry. So that might be a possibility as well. So it is really important to know the methodology. Okay. Whether there is a rating in Indonesia. So in Indonesia, again, as I mentioned before, we have not a rating per se. So this is actually the next slide here. In Indonesia, we have that's available currently are index provided by the index available in the Indonesian Stock Exchange. So the oldest index on ESG or sustainability investment that we have is actually Index Saham Sri Kehati, which started on 2009. So it's quite an old index where within it are a list of companies that are considered to have a best performance in their sustainability or ESG based on analysis by Kehati Foundation. So the one who analyzed it are Kehati Foundation. It's a non-governmental organizations that focuses on sustainability, especially the environmental issue. Kehati also issued new index in, again, I think 2002 or 2003, which is the ESG GQ45 and ESG sector leaders. So they have a sort of slightly different criteria. So in each of this index consists of list of companies that are considered to be best performance based on different criteria. For ESGSL, if I'm not mistaken, it consists of each sector leaders. So only one companies for banking sector, for example, only one companies for mining sector, for example. It's different with Sri Kahati because in Sri Kahati there might be 2 banks or 3 banks, and so on. So it's sort of a different set of portfolio. Another index that are newly introduced in 2020 is the IDX ESG Leader Index. This one is introduced by IDX. With the IDX Leader Index is here we see the criteria and the information or the data used is actually data provided by Sustainalytics. So here the ESG rating and controversy analysis that is developed by Sustainalytics are the one that used to create or set up this portfolio or this index. So this one are the one that's available in the stock exchange here in Indonesia, Ibu. And so, but then again, companies in Indonesia, some of them are also rated by the global rating agency that I mentioned before. So hope that helps. So what are the main concerns about the ESG market? Actually, IOSCO already published this report in around 2022 or 2021. They have these big concerns about ESG market because this ESG information market is largely unregulated. And even though I mentioned before, there are quite a few of major players, but if we look up at worldwide, there are quite a lot of rating that's include 160 ESG rating and data product providers worldwide. So it's quite a big market, especially nowadays when sustainable finance is getting into the mainstream. There's quite a lot of growth in the market. So information on ESG performance are increasingly needed. So therefore, market for these ESG informations are increasingly demanded by the users as well. But on the other hand, at that time in 2021 and 2022, the market is largely unregulated. Therefore, many market consolidations as well, as I mentioned before, many merger, many acquisitions happening. For example, KLD used to be not under MSCI. It used to be a different sort of entity, a separate independent entity. But then it was acquired. There's an acquisitions used performed by MSCI to acquire KLD, and this sort of strategy happening all over the world as well. So that's what's happening. What is this unregulated market mean? So again, there are concerns because there are little clarity and alignment on definition. What is actually the rating measure? What are the criteria that actually being used? Is there any transparency on the methodology? Do we know the indicators? Obviously, with the indicators, will need to be aggregated into a score. But how do we aggregate, right? Obviously, it is a weighted average, or is it a weighted aggregation method? If it's weighted, then what will be the weight? How the rating agency decide on the weight? The sort of methodologies, informations are not provided by many of the ESG rating providers, so there is a lack of transparency. There's a concern of divergence. I will mention this at the separate discussions as well here later on. This divergence here means that the same companies might have different score if they are rated by different rating agencies. So that's divergence. And there's also concern about conflict of interest, because the rating agencies that provide or assess or provide the score might actually also offer the advisory services to increase the score. So it's a sort of a conflict of interest here, because they are assessing the company, but they're also providing sort of consultation services for this company in an effort to increase the rating. So there might be a conflict of interest. there might be also a lack of a good communications between the corporations and then ESG rating. As I mentioned before, many ESG rating are implementing passive. So the company that might have sort of disagreement on the score that is published by certain ESG rating companies might have difficulties in contacting the rating agencies and maybe providing confirmations or asking for corrections and so on. Right. So these are the concerns that the IOSCO has already identified due to this largely unregulated market. Okay, so there's a question from Pawiki. Can a company publish an ESG report without being rated by international ESG rating agency? Yes, they can, obviously, Pawiki or Bu Wiki. So if there is no demand, so again, the decision by the ESG rating company to assess a certain corporations, a certain entities, for example, I have a company in Indonesia, let's say company ABC. Whether the rating firm will assess or will create a rating for my firm, it's purely their decision, the firm's decision. And mainly it is due to the demand from the investors. So if, for example, Sustainalytics receive a demand from their client, from their users, for example, I would like, or we have a plan to invest in Indonesia in this manufacturing sector, we might need some information for this type of companies, then Sustainalytics might start to look at companies in Indonesia within this sector, and they might start to assess the rating. But if there is no demand, then the rating firm might, I don't know their decision-making processes, but they might decide not to assess the company, even though the company have published sustainability report or ESG report. So that is possible. Okay, yeah. So this is the main concern. So that was the concern reported by IOSCO, but the investors and corporations also have some concerns in terms of quality and usefulness, and these are the factors that they are looking at when looking at the quality. So looking at the methodology, data sources, focus on material issue. If you're looking at the both of them, there might be slightly sort of a different percentage or different priority, but we see that mostly it's on quality of the methodology and the data sources. So these are the main factors that being considered. And I mentioned before about diversity or divergence in the rating agencies. This is actually have been studied by some researchers at the MIT in the US. They're looking at, it's actually part of my dissertation for PhD as well, we're looking at the different sort of ESG rating. So the team from MIT are trying to map some of the samples, and they're trying to map how the same company is being rated by different raters. And we can see here the same companies have for some of these companies, the score is really diverse. It's diverse. The divergence is quite big. For example, here in Atria Group, we see it can be in the very low, but it can also be in quite high, right? It's between the -2 and 2. Obviously, it's a standardized rating because they're trying to make it in the same scale. But we can see there's quite a difference here as well. And then we can see here as well with Philip Morris, and we can see as well here with the Japan Tobacco. So again, there is a divergence here. And here also the correlations, as we see, they're trying to correlate the score between some of the company, and we see the low correlations as well for some of the ratings. For example, here for some of the G, it's quite unrelated. So you have really a very low score and so on. So based on so this is based on my paper. So I'm a bit biased here because this is based on my paper, my dissertations for my PhD. looking at 4 samples of rating agency. When we're trying to, or when I was trying to categorize the indicators that they use, we see that they actually have different focus and some indicators are actually not covered. For example, here for indicators related to governance, considering with ownership structure and shareholder activisms, are not covered by Sustainalytics, but governance is really a big part, especially governance on shareholders activism and ownership structure is the top category with the highest number of indicator in Thomson Reuters. Thomson Reuters is now Refinitiv. So it's a very big gap here in terms of how do they define ESG and how do they prioritize ESG within their methodology, right? So this is one of the reasons why their score can be very different because they have a different set of indicators and methodology. Okay. Okay, I'm trying to answer some questions as well. Here, Ibu Christine Peppa, can ESG rating prevent social or greenwashing in companies? Some argue, some proponent and some research have argued that yes, they can, but only to a certain degree, so not become the one and only sort of prevention method for greenwashing. They can help to reduce greenwashing, especially if the rating agency maybe have more on more on an independent stance, so they have no active info. They have no other communications or other sort of services provided to the corporate other than just rating, because again, as I mentioned before, for some companies the rating firm can actually have 2 products provided to the corporations, which is the consultations and the other. But if they only have this product and the methodology itself is robust, so we also have to see the methodology of the rating itself. If the methodology is robust in a way that they not only refer to the self-assessment or self-disclosure, which is obviously sustainability report is a self-disclosure by the company, but also refer to other type of more sort of independent source of information as well. So it can also be deemed as a prevention measure, or as to look up at the verification measure on whether the company actually do greenwashing or not, but only to a certain extent, right? It can help, but I think there is a limitations of ESG rating itself. And again, as I mentioned, because of this concern due to the ESG rating and ESG market, this role or this benefit will also be limited as well. Okay. Bu Darshini, is there a concern that much of the rating is based on data availability rather than data quality? There is a concern regarding that as well. Again, so some majority of the company use self-assessment. So this is actually, again, related to the quality of disclosure. So majority of the rating companies are using sustainability report published by the company as one of the main source of their rating assessment. So obviously, if the sustainability report is low quality, obviously then the ESG rating lead to low quality ESG rating itself. So it is a concern, Bu Darshini. Ibu Dian here. From my understandings, I haven't seen ESG rating that ESG rating firms or that specific for certain industry. They do have obviously some companies, some firms, some rating firms actually have different set of indicators. For example, banking will have 150 indicators, mining will have 200 indicators, manufacturing will have 100 indicators for their rating. But I don't think they publish specifically, for example, ESG rating banking, for example. They might provide those data in sort of more tailored. So if their clients, right, if the investor required, okay, give me this specific data for this specific industry, they might be able to obviously create that sort of a tailored product. But the main product being sort of published or provided, haven't seen a specific form like that. Kemudian. But obviously they can. I mean, if the rating agency decided to, they can. But I haven't seen the one that's offered publicly. They might offer it in sort of more tailored, tailored format for their specific clients, as per client demands, I guess. So again, that's concern about the ESG market and ESG ratings. What is the newest development in the ESG rating sort of market or ESG rating industry? The most recent development is the regulations in the EU. So again, European Union have the most recent regulation. It just released into 2024 earlier this year regarding the ESG rating regulation. So nowadays, they try to create a standardized definition. So ESG rating encompass environmental, social, human rights, and governance. And then it's if the rating agency would like to provide rating in the EU, then they have to be authorized by the European Securities and Market Authority. But if it's established in the EU, I mean, if it's established out of the EU, then they might have to get endorsement. They might have to get some subsidiaries, or they have to be included in the registries and so on. But there are also some regulations about the methodology that the regulation will also include some minimum transparencies in terms of their rating methodology. And one of the main key points within these regulations is the principle of separations, meaning that they have to separate the rating business and certain other activities. It's sort of like what we have seen before when we have this Arthur Andersen and Enron cases in the year 2000s, when the public accounting firm have to separate their audit firm, the audit entities, and the consulting entities. So now it's in EU, it's become one of the requirements where the rating agencies have to separate the entities. So the entities that provide the rating has to be separate than the entities that provide the consultancy or advisory or other type of businesses. But they do have a possibility. They don't have to separate legal entities if there is a clear separation. So again, personally, I haven't seen the very detailed regulation. So this is only based on the press release that they published in 2024 in February. So we'll see what the very detailed minimum requirement for methodology, for example, the very detailed sort of principle of separations. I think it's going to be hopefully this year that we will have more clarity on the detail for this type of regulations. But there is a movement for regulations. If I'm not mistaken, Singapore is also moving toward regulating ESG rating as well. But personally, I haven't seen whether there is some sort of a draft or exposure draft or press releases in a more specific key components of the regulations going to be. So I would like to end this presentations by showing you some of the recommendations provided by, again, sustainability in regard to the use of this ESG rating. So if you are an investor, obviously, if you are looking at using ESG rating, always cross-check information and show the data quality and show that the rating actually reflects sustainability performance that we as investors or as users would like to see. Or for example, if we are looking on sustainability performance that focusing on environment and social and only a slight focus on governance, then we are obviously have to look on which ESG rating that have the same definitions as what we want. And obviously, if there is any sort of issue, then the sustainability encourage the user to provide to communicate to the rating agencies on some of the improvement recommendations. So obviously, again, as I mentioned before, if any of you want to use ESG rating, make sure you understand the methodology, make sure you understand what does ESG means for them, right? Again, especially for governance, what is the governance means? For socials, for example, generally, after some of the observations that I did personally for some of the research that I did, a big differences are usually within the social issue, because social issue for certain companies might means more on the employment, and so some might focus more on human rights and so on. So it can be sort of a different interpretations per se. So that's for users. Now, for corporate, this is what the sustainability in their report said. So again, if the question, as one of you asked before, if we are corporations, which one that we should focus on? As I mentioned before, there are divergence, there are diversity of the rating. For example, if we are the company, and then we see we are rated by rating agency A, we got score of 50, rating agency B, we got score of 60, rating C, we got score of 90, for example. Which one that we should focus on for our own improvement, for example? Now, sustainability, and this is also based on some studies, look up at the rating that used by your investors or used by your stakeholders. So ask your investors, ask your stakeholders, which one that you actually use, or we actually using Sustainalytics, for example. So yeah, focus on that. Or if your investors actually, oh, we are using both Sustainalytics and MSCI. So okay, maybe we can try to use both of them. Or what is the rating that used by investors? Again, that provide ESG raters that, sort of proactive or sort of accept cooperations, right? And then conduct ESG. So when the company are preparing their disclosures and so on, try to also matching it up with the indicators that also being assessed by the rating agencies. And one thing that also important is if we're using XBRL, it might be easier for the rating agency, for the analysts of rating agencies to have a reading of the disclosure instead of, providing a more lengthy paragraph and so on. So that's are the two recommendations that's provided by sustainability, and also actually align with the studies on the ESG information as well. I think that's it from me. Thank you for your attention for this 90 minutes. Any more questions? Yeah. Pak Ashari?
Yes, thank you very much. Very comprehensive. My company is one of the emittent or public company that have already rate for since 2020. But we have experience that now is getting difficult because the changing of the methodology. That's the first part, and then also the different provider giving the different methodology, so it cannot be compared to every rater. That's also a problem. And then I would like to recommend to all the company would like to have the rate. I strongly agree that you have to see what your needs, because that is very related to what you need for your company, is that the investors needs the numbers from the Sustainalytics, or they use or MSCI or others. And then I would like to add some information. For Sustainalytics, they are changing since this year. They cannot give any consultation. So for the ratings, they only have the unsolicited parts, and then what we pay or the company pays are for the license for 1 year. So this is because from their information is the EU regulators are critics for their methodology. I think that's for me. I will hope Indonesia have ESG rating soon from Indonesia because it's not very applicable, especially for us, the public company. We have different backgrounds for governance. For example, some of the international raters are giving deeply uh, assessment for boards or commissioners. That's a different path for us, especially for SOE and
Yep.
others private company. I think that's should be put in consider for the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pak Shari, for the additional information. So yeah, I agree in a way that hopefully we will have our own rating firm or rating agencies that are endorsed by the regulators, right, Pak? And then we can see, as Pak Shari mentioned as well, obviously contextual differences make it more difficult for certain companies and companies in developing countries, especially if we are rated by global rating firms, because they have their own contextual issues, right? But especially for certain aspect, as Pak Ashari mentioned, for governance, because of the 1 tier, 2 tier differences and so on. So that might be a concern as well. Thank you so much, Pak Ashari, for the additional information. Thank you, Bapak Ibu. If there is no other questions and no other comment, I would like to close my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. Hopefully my presentation is useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you Bu Lulu for the presentation. It's obviously a new knowledge for us ya Bapak Ibu ya. We can take a brief summary that ESG ratings provide information and assessment about the sustainability performance derived by analyzing ESG data. Usually it's a numeric data or letter grades like AAA, BBB of a company or a financial instrument to expose or show sustainability risk and its impact on people and the environment. There are some examples of the ESG ratings like MSCI KLD, one of the earliest, Definitive ESG score, Bloomberg ESG disclosure score. And then who provides the data? The major providers such as owned by financial data firms, Bloomberg Sustainalytics MSCI, independent institution, Ecovadis, Repris, Capital, CDP, owned by stock markets, ISS, ESG, Refinitiv, etc., and by credit raters, S&P Global Ratings, Sustainable Fitch, etc. The main factor this ratings agency assess the sustainability performance of a company is the demands from the client and customer. So if the XY company doesn't have rank yet, that doesn't mean that the company they are not good. Again, thank you so much Bu Lulu, Bapak Ibu sekalian yang sudah hadir di workshop hari ini. See you on the next workshop, Bapak Ibu. Saya izin tutup Zoom-nya.
Thank you, Bapak Ibu.
Thank you,
Thank you, makasih.
Mbak Amalia, Bu Lulu.
Terima kasih, Bapak
Terima
Ibu.
kasih, Mbak.
Terima kasih.